This is a presentation on Yucca Mountain, specifically the legal and the political aspects of Yucca Mountain. I'm Guerinot, and I'd like to thank you for joining me in this presentation. Recognizing action needed to be taken to dispose of the nation's growing stockpiles of nuclear waste from commercial and defense applications, Congress in 1982 enacted the Nuclear Waste Policy Act. Aside from establishing a federal repository for the acceptance of spent nuclear fuel and high-level radioactive waste from both commercial and military applications, it also established a timeline for the collection of nuclear waste to begin in January of 1998. The Act also established a nuclear waste fund, which is composed of fees levied against the nuclear power utility companies. The collection of fees was going to pay for the cost of construction and operation of the permanent repository. The Nuclear Waste Fund receives almost $750 million in fee revenues each year and currently has an unspent balance of $25 billion. The big question, of course, was where to build the nation's repository. The Nuclear Waste Policy Act required the selection of two separate repository sites. The purpose of selecting two separate sites was to minimize the transportation risks associated with transporting spent nuclear fuel and high-level radioactive waste, and also to select two separate regions so that two separate regions could equally share the burden of having a repository located in that area. In accordance with the Nuclear Waste Policy Act, the Department of Energy had identified three potential sites for the permanent repository: Smith County, Texas; Hanford, Washington; and Yucca Mountain, Nevada. Also in 1987, Congress voted to amend the Nuclear Waste Policy Act. The very senior senators from Texas and Washington, not wanting to have a nuclear repository in their backyards and thereby upsetting their constituency, pressured the junior senator from Nevada, and Yucca Mountain was named the sole repository site. Over the next 10 years, the Department of Energy began geological exploratory studies of the Yucca Mountain site. They researched geological characteristics such as soil density, water runoff, and seismic stability, anything that could impact the integrity of the Yucca Mountain containment once constructed. In 1993, the Department of Energy formulated a new program approach that was to begin waste acceptance in 2010. This program relied heavily on the Department of Energy's development and distribution of multi-purpose canisters to begin interim waste storage in 1998. In January of 1998, the Nuclear Waste Policy Act deadline for government acceptance of waste rolled around. The utility companies were ready to start handing over their waste, but Yucca Mountain interim storage plan was not ready. The Department of Energy was beginning to feel the heat even before the 1998 deadline. In order to accelerate the timeline for the collection of nuclear waste and disposal, the Department of Energy created a single contract for the disposal of spent nuclear fuel and/or high-level radioactive waste, also known as the Standard Contract, and they entered into the contract with all nuclear power providers. In an attempt to avoid paying restitution to the nuclear power utility companies, that had paid into the Nuclear Waste Fund, the Department of Energy exercised an unavoidable delay clause from the standard contract. The Department of Energy's argument was the fact that since Yucca Mountain had not yet been built and the facilities not available for an interim storage, created an unavoidable delay. In 1996, the Indiana-Michigan Power Company sought a preemptive judicial review from the U.S. Court of Appeals of the Department of Energy's interpretation of the unavoidable delay. The D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals ruled in favor of Indiana-Michigan Power Company, stating that the two separate sections of the Nuclear Waste Policy Act, 302A and 302B, were individual statutory requirements. This meant that the availability of a repository was independent of the government's obligation to begin accepting nuclear waste. Following the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals ruling in favor of Indiana-Michigan, the Department of Energy continued claiming the unavoidable delay clause of the standard contract. They told utility companies they were unable to take possession of any waste, but might be able to starting in 2010. In 1997, utility companies responded by asking the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals to issue a writ of mandamus, known as the Northern States Mandamus, to compel the DOE to honor the statutory obligation of accepting nuclear waste. The D.C. Circuit Court ruled that they could not force the Department of Energy to act until all available administrative options of the standard contract were exhausted. However, the D.C. Circuit Court did rule that the Department of Energy could no longer use its own delays as an unavoidable clause under the standard contract. Following the deadline of January in 1998, many utility companies decided to begin seeking monetary damages, claiming breaches of contract with the U.S. Court of Federal Claims. So the U.S. Court of Federal Claims had to decide whether or not the utility companies had exhausted all possible relief that was available in the standard contract. In a pivotal case between Maine Yankee Atomic Power and the U.S. Court of Federal Claims, the court ruled that there was insufficient relief provided under the standard contract. And in the year 2000, the court's ruling opened the door for all utility companies to begin filing damage claims against the Department of Energy for breach of contract. This series of litigation between the Department of Energy and utility companies is merely the tip of the iceberg of legal issues surrounding the Yucca Mountain decision-making process. The state of Nevada by itself filed several lawsuits against the U.S. government. Some of these suits were filed against the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, the Department of Energy, and the Environmental Protection Agency. In retrospect, one has to ask the question, how did this go so wrong? That's a very difficult question because I think there are several things that went wrong in this process. But to summarize, from the very beginning, the selection of Yucca Mountain site was done through political expediency. Because the decision-making process was done through political expediency, this posed several challenges for the leadership. And without the proper leadership, Yucca Mountain could never become a reality. I'm Guerinot, and I want to thank you again for joining me in this presentation.